Internet, and welcome to another episode of Reporters Year in Review podcast. I'm Ryan, the technology editor, and with me today to talk about mental and emotional wellness here at RIT throughout the academic year is
Kevin Zampieron. I'm the Views editor.
And Madeleigh Place, I'm the online art director.
Thank you both for joining me.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of found this like an interesting topic because I feel like a lot of our articles this year have kind of reflected like an increased conversation around kind of like mental and emotional well-being. And like kind of like some of the events which kind of like embody that was like we wrote an article about like how like the counseling and psychological services were recently announced. They're going to be expanding them here at RIT. Mm-hmm. And also like you wrote an article in the fall, Kevin, kind of like affirming that like RIT has safe spaces. And that was at the time where like a lot of people were talking about like, do we really need trigger warnings? Like there was kind of like a backlash against.
And a lot of this, just as a background, kind of comes from right now we're in sort of a mental illness epidemic, and I think like the suicide rate is at a 30-year high, and with people in our age group, it's the second highest leading cause of death, taking out like accidents, and so. And it's a real problem, and but at the same time, it's also kind of being a little more in the mainstream. Like it's not like a professional death sentence if you were to admit that like you do have any kind of mental health issue. Like before, it was a complete non-starter, and like I forget exactly which political candidate it was, but it was some vice presidential candidate at some point. Just even like rumors of like having depression was enough to like kill his like chances. So now it's like a lot more in the open. Rightfully so.
Yeah.
So like, I'm glad you brought all that up because like I think the way I wanted to start this discussion is kind of like talk about why is it important essentially. Like it seems like a simple question, but like I feel like it's one worth addressing. Why is it important to kind of have this expansion of both like mental and emotional well-being services here on campus?
Yeah,
I'd be interested to hear both your perspectives.
Yeah. So this expansion of the counseling services is obviously to like fit a need. You know, it only happened because people were demanding it, and people are demanding it because it's just become as normal as going to like the doctor or like you hurt your knee, you get like an X-ray or whatever. It's the same general like focus on wellness. It's just expanded like to sort of the more mental and emotional space of it. So I think it's just a natural outgrowth of that.
Yeah. As someone who definitely uses the counseling and psychological services, and I go there biweekly and monthly to the psychiatrist on campus, we definitely have a need for these facilities. And I say that not just because like in college, students are more likely to find out that they have a mental illness or something like that, because a lot of times a lot of mental illnesses, like the symptoms and stuff, are brought forward by large amounts of stress, and most kids don't realize like they have so many symptoms until they are met with this amount of stress.
Right.
So with a campus this large, having one, psychiatrist and only a handful of counselors and some office hours that are only open from like 9 to 4:30 or 5 or something, it definitely does not meet the requirements that we have to have to take care of everybody. So
I'd imagine it's just like difficult to learn when like if you're a student and you're dealing with all this other like
yes. Yeah, it's like it's my 4th year and I still have another year because it's been 3 years of me trying to deal with a bunch of different mental illnesses, and it's not always just one. Like I have depression. Some kids learn like I have depression and I'm bipolar, or I have depression and blah blah blah. Like depression is sometimes like the secondary thing to a bigger underlying problem, and even just going in and getting their depression like realized, I guess, like sometimes it helps to find like more. Like there's more stacked on top of this, and
I think the college campuses have like it's kind of like the worst case scenario for someone with any kind of mental health issue, because like you go here like there's like a list somewhere. It's like a checklist of like these like stressors and like that could like sort of like cause this stuff, and like it's stuff like moving and like losing a friend group, or like being away from your parents, and like or like stress, and like a new job, and like college is like every single one of those things put together.
Yeah.
It's
a
just
black hole which just sucks in every stress.
absolutely.
literally it.
And the thing is, like, we kind of like fetishize that a little bit. Is in like oh, I pulled an all-nighter last night, like, oh, I drank coffee at all times, and it's like we're just kind of like almost kind of identifying with the stress as like a personality trait, when in reality it's just a very unhealthy way to deal with stuff, you know?
Yeah. I had to severely cut back on my credit hours after freshman year because I learned I am bipolar and I have OCD. And one of my things with bipolar is I get extremely manic, and I would go like weeks, like 2 or 3 weeks at a time without like sleeping regularly. Like I'd sleep like an hour or two at a time, and obviously that's like bad. That's really bad. But because I was in art school, I thought like, oh no, it's just all of my projects. Like I would do all of my projects while I wasn't sleeping. So I was like, clearly this is because of my homework stress load and stuff like that. Like I was at max credits and everything because it was freshman year. And no, as it turns out, I have, like after break, when I'd go home for breaks, it would be, I'd be terrible. I'd be dead. I'd be super like low and everything. And I knew I had depression, so I figured it was just that. No, it was just that I was bipolar and my body was really trying to tell me like, this is bad. And I needed to like get these things checked, but I only assumed it was because of college, because I was, away from my mom, so I didn't have like my typical routines. I wasn't home my first year out of high school. I have so many art projects and whatever, and that wasn't it at all.
Yeah.
Do you think coming into college, like a lot of that maybe just like a lot of us as students aren't maybe necessarily equipped with the right language or kind of just like the right mindset to like talk about or even understand this like mental illness is a thing. And I think that's something else I wanted to ask the both of you about in terms of like just having these sorts of conversations are kind of just like, I feel like maybe this year, like we've talked more about mental illness both in our articles or just kind of in general on campus. Just like it's more of a thing to talk about it now. Does that help like erode the stigma around it?
Yeah, I definitely think we're like right at the forefront where we're kind of like peeling away the layer. Like the first layer has been peeled off, where people are like, okay, mental awareness or mental health awareness. And it's not like, early 2000s to 80s before where, people are just like, you're not depressed. Like depression doesn't affect us and whatever. But now we're like, depression and other mental illnesses exist because it's not always just depression. But now we're finally like, I feel like we're finally breaking into like the next layer where it's like, all right, this is how to help. And it's not a bad thing. I don't view it as a bad thing, mental illness. And it has the word illness connected to it. So it has the connotations of like, oh no, you're sick. It's like, I don't view myself as sick. I have things that I need to take care of, like anybody else might. But it just happens to be mentally and, not physically, whereas like somebody has a bad knee. They have to take precautions with their bad knee. It's like, I just have some other precautions. And so we're breaking into that next layer where we can definitely find more resources for these people and, me, others, etc., which I think is very good. Kevin, did you have something to say?
No,
yeah, no. But
well, I was just not to derail too much, but
No,
I was gonna just bring up a plot point in what was it, House of Cards, and like it's a pretty minor thing in the show, but what the whole thing is like the president resigns after the scandal comes out that he takes antidepressants, and like, which sounds ludicrous. I mean, granted, it's not. I don't think it's a good show, but I think it is a generational gap. Like that could be a huge scandal to someone of like like 40 years ago that they're like dealing with that, but like to someone like in our generation, it's just like okay, so
no, definitely
so what,
I'm lucky that I grew up in a household that definitely like it's like my bipolar is definitely genetic. Like my mom's bipolar and my grandma and my great grandma, like they're definitely, but my grandma refuses to acknowledge that. She's like, I can't be, like, that's a bad, terrible thing. But my mom, she's more understanding, and she's like, no, this is a thing and we can get help and it's fine. I can still live my life. Like she raised 3 kids on her own and, 2 are in college now, and she did all of that mostly undiagnosed and unmedicated for a while.
Yeah.
And then, recently she's gotten help and like now she's like, I feel great. Now I don't have to struggle with this on top of all of my other stressors. Whereas my grandma is definitely like, no, I cannot be, but she has like a really hard time dealing with a lot of things because she's never like helped herself, I guess is the term for that. Yeah.
It sounds like a part of it is if people are more willing to talk about it, you just like more people realize you're just not alone dealing with this.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So I did want to transition to maybe the next topic if that's okay. I want to talk about an article you actually wrote, Kevin, about how I kind of mentioned it before, but like safe spaces, safe places, and kind of just talk about like how do we balance having conversations about difficult subject matter and also respecting people's needs for safe spaces, like.
Well, okay. First thing I think that kind of got to get out of the way is that mostly when people are complaining about safe spaces, they don't actually know what they're complaining about. I feel like this idea that it's somehow suppressing free speech is just an entirely ludicrous construct come up with people who aren't actually in the college environment. I think if I walked into a room and was like, how many of you people cannot express an opinion you have because of a safe space? No one would raise their hand. Yeah. And if you were, like, it's just an asshole opinion and probably don't say that. You know what I mean? And I think that's maybe that has to do with part of it, but that's getting a little bit farther away from this conversation. But so it's just how do we accommodate people of different backgrounds? How do we make sure everything is like respectful, and like how can we? Because it's like that's the thing. In the article, I kind of talk about. I interviewed Sharon Sattler-LeBlanc, and she says if you don't feel safe, or if you're dealing with another underlying issue, it could be hard to learn. And that's just sort of it. Like, we go to school to learn. And, like, maybe taking these precautions or having, like, a trigger warning or something might feel like a barrier to some people who don't have to deal with it. But to the people who need those, it's, like, opening things up. So by not having those, you're restricting their free speech.
But to clarify, like, the presence of a trigger warning doesn't necessarily mean, like, oh, we're just not going to talk about this.
Yeah.
It just, it says that we are going to talk about this.
Exactly. There's
No, go ahead.
There's nobody is censored. There's just an expansion of the conversation.
Yeah, that's basically it. And it's, I think about it as, like, just accommodating people. Like, there are things there to, like, help other people feel comfortable so that we can all, like, be together. Yeah. That's essentially it.
It's like being angry at a wheelchair ramp. It's like, why?
Yeah, there's
it's like so cartoonishly, like.
Yeah, it's like it's there to help this person get to there. It's not hurting you.
Yeah. Essentially,
I mean, if you're not part of that safe space, like if you don't need the resources of that safe space, that's okay.
Yeah.
You have a separate safe space in some capacity, like. Maybe somewhere else accommodates to your needs, but just because you're not specifically part of that community, you're not of that background, etc. Like that doesn't.
And I think that's where a lot of the tension does come from, because a lot of these safe spaces are people who are designed for, like, I mean, we have the Q Center, that's a safe space. Of course, it's meant for those people, and then people who it's not meant for are just very used to having all of their spaces, like, something for them. Like, because it's like you're part of, like, the monoculture, so you feel excluded because you're just used to having access everywhere.
Yeah.
And if you don't have as much access in this one area, or, like, it's not built for you, it almost feels like you're somehow being persecuted. So
it's
no, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I was gonna say it's definitely like it's a lot of people who don't need these safe spaces, they, like, kind of push to the back of their head. They're like, everything's good, everything's fine. But as soon as it's, like, brought up, it's like, oh, people need that. What? And then, wait, I don't need that? What's going on? And then it's like kind of like just that conflict of like sudden realization, like, how do I process this?
Right.
And
Self-reflection is hard.
yeah, exactly. And a lot of people, like, they don't want to deal with those kinds of thoughts. So it's like immediately like, bad, no, I don't need it. So like, why do they need it? Kind of.
For those who do feel like they need these safe spaces, like I might as well just like give them the benefit of the doubt, just like because like if they feel like they need it and like I can't personally relate to it, like why not default to their judgment?
I mean, it's just acknowledging other people's perspectives as valid as your own, and not trying to impose it on others. I think that's I mean, and it's so simple. It's so easy. Just be like, okay, like, sure, like just accept your reality around you instead of trying to impose your own kind of like insecurities onto the world. I don't know.
Yeah. No, yeah, I totally agree. And it's like, in context with like the campus, if somebody's like upset with the Q Center being like a safe space, it's like it's one room where a bunch of like-minded people who go through the same like trials and tribulations in their daily life because they're LGBTQ plus, like they can all just gather and be in their own space community and rejuvenate themselves by being around other people like themselves. And then they can just go out, and it's like you're not forced to go stand in there. You're not forced to go like look at it or anything. It's unfortunately tucked away into the very recesses of our SAU. Like it's all the way down past the reporter office in a secret place. But like you're not forced to do anything. Like if you don't agree with the things that the Q Center provides, okay, that's first of all really shitty of you. Second of all, like. You just don't need to be there. You can just be somewhere else. Like
live your life.
Yeah, like elsewhere without, making somebody else's life like bad.
Yeah, and I think other people would be okay with that, and then some people, but a lot of people like get kind of upset when it starts to like, go into their sphere of like
exactly. Yeah.
I don't know. Privilege, I guess.
No, that is a big part of it. Yeah.
And like, and they're like, okay, I can't say these things I would normally say that made a regular part of my speech because just to accommodate other people, and other people just like have a hard time accommodating others.
Yeah,
I think this is where it comes from.
I think a lot of those kinds of people, like, who are like, well, now I can't say these things or think these things and like things like that. They don't really actually realize how much weight words have. And it's like speaking via, sign language or verbally, that's our main form of communication. And so like communicating those ideas using certain words, phrases, etc., like that is obviously going to hurt somebody. That is not a great idea. Like, I don't know if you set out every day to be as awful as you can be and use as many, like, slurs and etc. against a certain kind of person, but maybe, life would probably be better if you didn't. Like, that's my thought personally, but...
At the end of the day, it very much just sounds like just being more mindful of what you say.
Yeah.
I did want to kind of reiterate, just like talk about like just we touched upon this before, but just like how like the existence of safe spaces, for instance, does not limit like the free exchange of ideas. And you had an interesting point about that in your article, Kevin, and talking about how like they may seem like diametrically opposed concepts, but in reality they're complementary. I was wondering if you could expand on that a bit. Yeah,
I mean, and it kind of just goes back to what we've been talking about. I mean, for example, I know RIT has our gray matters discussions, and like those are a very like celebrated part of our school's culture. Essentially, where we come up with, we have an idea and we invite everyone to come to it and we talk about it, and it's just making sure like it's kind of a more level, I guess, playing field when we're discussing something, and like making sure that everyone feels like they're comfortable in like voicing their perspective, and it's just like, I don't think it's restricting any kind of actual discussion. It's just opening it up more, and it's making it more nuanced. And I think if you think that's an assault on your free speech, I think you should check what you're talking about, because it might not be as profound as you think.
Yeah. And I think too, like, obviously I didn't write this article, but I read it, and kind of like something that I took away from that quote too is like literally the idea of a safe space kind of brings to mind like something that people might not have thought of before, like we said earlier, and like that in itself is an exchange of an idea, and they might expand upon that and find like, oh, I'm not like, I understand this now, so maybe I should, reflect that in my daily actions or whatever, and like I understand this group's need for this or whatever. And it's like just the very mention of a safe space. It's like, LGBTQ plus needs a safe space. It is the Q Center. People are like, oh, I wonder why. They do research, hopefully, and, they come to their own conclusions and realize like, oh, it is because of this, this, and this. Okay, interesting. I'm not going to, impose on them because they need that space, like, to foster community and, like, their own feelings and etc. So it's, like, that in itself is very important.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both for joining me.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, you're welcome.
This has been a great discussion. And if you'd like to participate in the discussion as well, dear listener, please...
Singular.
I'm talking to them. Feel free to tweet at us at ReporterMag on Twitter or leave a comment on the site. We also have an Instagram page at ReporterMag. Or please check out some of the other episodes of this series that we're doing, the Year in Review podcast. Once again, thank you for listening. Have a good one.
Reporter out.